The rain had stopped over northern France, leaving the hedgerows dripping with mist and the smell of oil and pine drifting through the morning haze. Along a rutted lane outside Villers-Bocage, the men of Sherman Panzer-Abteilung 503 gathered beside their machines, hulking Panzer VI Tigers, whose armor plates still bore the dust of Ukraine and Kursk. The crews smoked and joked as mechanics tightened track bolts and topped off coolant. One gunner, Obergefreiter Hans Löwe, spat into the mud and said with a grin, "The Tommies are bringing their Streichholzschachteln again, matchboxes." Laughter rippled through the line. The nickname had spread from the Eastern Front to France, shorthand for the American-built M4 Sherman, easy to ignite, easy to kill. For nearly 2 years, German armoured units had lived on a reputation built from iron and terror. The Tiger Y, with its 88mm KWK 36 gun and near-impervious frontal armour, was the apex predator of Europe's tank battles. Allied crews spoke of it with a mixture of awe and resignation. Reports from Tunisia and Italy had told the same story. Shermans had to swarm a Tiger from 3 sides just to stand a chance. Inside the Panzer Command tent, Lieutenant Karl Wilhelm Ahrens studied his map of Normandy, its roads traced with red pencil. Rumours of an Allied invasion were constant now. Radio chatter, reconnaissance flights, the ceaseless whisper of movement across the Channel. But to his men, the coming battle felt inevitable, even welcome. "If the English want France," he told his driver, "they'll have to burn their matchboxes to get it." That confidence was not entirely misplaced. By 1944, the German Armoured Corps, Panzerwaffe, had refined its doctrine around heavily armed and thickly armoured vehicles, supported by efficient communications and disciplined gunnery. The Tiger I's main gun could penetrate 100mm of armour at 1,500 metres, often killing an Allied tank before it could return fire. Panzer Regiment 503's war diary for May 1944 recorded the tone of superiority. "Our Tigers remain unchallenged in frontal engagements. Enemy tanks, especially the American type, burst into flames after a few hits. Morale excellent. The Tiger crews were not just soldiers, they were craftsmen of destruction, trained to perfection on mechanical giants. Each machine required 300 man-hours of maintenance for every day in combat. But to men like Löwe and Ahrens, the Tiger was more than a weapon. It was proof of Germany's technological destiny. In comparison, Allied armour seemed crude. The British still fielded Churchills, slow, thick-skinned relics of another era. The Canadians drove Shermans, built fast and light for mass production. The Germans called them Feuerzeuge, lighters, because one hit from an 88mm round would ignite their gasoline engines. When Allied air reconnaissance was spotted over the Calvados countryside, Ahrens' men took bets on how many Shermans they'd destroy once the invasion came. Few doubted the outcome. Across the Channel, however, the British and Canadians had done their own calculations. In the spring of 1944, the 21st Army Group under General Bernard Montgomery prepared to land not just men and supplies, but an entirely restructured armoured force. British doctrine had evolved painfully from North Africa. Gone were the days of cruiser and infantry tanks operating in isolation. Now combined arms ruled, tanks, infantry, artillery and air support synchronized by wireless and careful coordination. The goal was not individual heroism, but relentless, cumulative pressure. Still, the armoured officers of Montgomery's staff knew the statistics. The standard M4 Sherman, supplied by the Americans, mounted a 75mm gun capable of defeating Panzer IVs at medium range, but hopelessly inadequate against Tigers or Panthers frontally. A 21st Army Group technical briefing, dated 25th May 1944, summarized the grim arithmetic. In open combat, the Sherman's 75mm will not penetrate the frontal glacis of the Tiger at any range. The Panther's frontal armour remains immune beyond 800 yards. Our advantage must be maneuver, coordination, and numerical superiority. That numerical superiority would have to suffice. For every Tiger the Wehrmacht could field in Normandy, the Allies would land more than 20 Shermans. It was a war of quantity versus quality, and the men who would fight it knew which side had the better steel. What the Germans saw as weakness, American and British engineers considered pragmatism. The M4 Sherman was a soldier's tank, simple to build, easy to maintain, and fast enough to keep pace with advancing infantry. A U.S. Army Ordnance report from 1943 described its virtues in plain language. The M4A2 medium tank emphasizes operational reliability and mechanical accessibility above all else. In sustained operations, it remains in service where heavier tanks fail for want of parts. The Sherman's welded hull, stabilized gunsight, and efficient radial engine gave it remarkable endurance. In Normandy's rough terrain, those features would matter as much as armour thickness. But its thin sides and gasoline engine also meant vulnerability. German AP shells from the 88mm or even 75mm high-velocity guns tore through it like paper. Survivors described the distinctive smell of burning paint and fuel, the breathing sound of fire inside the hull, hence the bitter Allied nickname Ronson, light's first strike. Still, the Allies had no choice. The Sherman was the tank they had, and the invasion depended on it. By late May, the Wehrmacht's frontline units in France were jittery from expectation. Radio traffic from the Channel Islands, reports of paratroop sightings and naval activity off Portsmouth all hinted that something vast was coming. Yet morale within the panzer divisions remained high. Crews mocked Allied equipment in letters home. An entry in a captured German field notebook, later analysed by Allied intelligence, recorded the confidence bluntly. "American tanks are child's toys. We will destroy them as in Italy. They cannot fight the Tiger. Their courage is in their numbers." Even as Luftwaffe reconnaissance reported convoys massing along the English coast, panzer commanders believed the outcome of the first armoured clashes was predetermined. What they did not know, what they could not imagine, was that the Allies had quietly prepared a response. In workshops and depots across southern England, British engineers had taken a standard Sherman and forced into it one of the deadliest guns of the war, the 17-pounder. Its muzzle flash was blinding, its recoil violent, but its shell could punch through a Tiger's frontal armour from 1,500 yards. The men who would drive these new tanks, code-named Fireflies, were training in secret even as German crews drank beer and boasted of their invincibility. On the evening of June 4, 1944, the wind shifted along the Norman coast. Storms pounded the Channel, delaying an invasion by a single day. In his command post near Lisieux, Aron wrote in his diary, "Reports of ships in the Channel. False alarms, perhaps. Let them come. France will burn their paper tanks." He blew out the candle, confident that his Tigers would rule the battlefield once more. But within 72 hours, as the first waves of Allied armour crawled inland from the beaches, the German laughter would stop. The matchboxes were coming, and among them, hidden in plain sight, a few would carry a sting sharp enough to kill a Tiger. Winter, 1943. In a dimly lit ordnance workshop in Lulworth, Dorset, a group of British engineers huddled around a Sherman turret perched awkwardly on blocks. It was not the elegant symmetry of a new design, but a problem, a puzzle forced upon them by battlefield necessity. The war in North Africa and Italy had proven one thing beyond doubt. The standard 75mm Sherman gun could not face a Tiger head-on. Major George Brighty of the Royal Armoured Corps leaned against the turret ring, arms crossed, a cigarette burning down unnoticed. He had seen what an 88mm shell could do to a Sherman. "We can't keep sending men into ovens," he said. His voice was soft, but it carried weight. Around him, draftsmen and fitters studied blueprints of a weapon too big for the tank before them, the 17-pounder, Britain's most powerful anti-tank gun. To most ordnance officers, the idea of mounting it on a Sherman was absurd. The gun was nearly twice as long as the American 75mm, and its recoil mechanism alone filled the space where a loader should stand. But Brighty and his commanding officer, Colonel W.G.K. Kilbourne, were desperate. The Americans were slow to introduce their new 76mm gun, and reports from Italy suggested that even it might not suffice. In a memorandum dated December 7, 1943, Kilbourne wrote to the Ministry of Supply, "We require immediate upgunning of Sherman tanks to counteract German heavy armour in the forthcoming continental operations. The 17-pounder remains our sole effective instrument." It was a bureaucratic understatement hiding a field soldier's fear. The engineers began by stripping the turret interior. The 17-pounder's breech was so large that they had to rotate the gun sideways during installation, then recenter it after fitting. The recoil guard was removed entirely. The radio, originally mounted behind the turret, had to be relocated into a metal box welded to the rear hull, creating the Firefly's distinctive bustle. It was a Frankenstein's child of necessity, half British, half American, all compromise. Even then, the recoil from the 17-pounder was violent enough to threaten the turret's structural integrity. The balance was wrong. The long barrel caused the gun to droop forward. A counterweight was added at the breech, fashioned from scrap steel and bolted into place. The gunner's seat had to be lowered, the loader's movements restricted to a narrow arc. Everything inside was cramped and hot. "It was like fighting inside a boiler," recalled one veteran of the 13th 18th Royal Hussars. But when the first test shot rang out on the Lulworth range, the results were undeniable. At 1,500 yards, the 17-pounder's APCBC, armour-piercing capped ballistic cap, round punched through 140mm of steel, more than enough to pierce a Tiger I's frontal armour. The recoil slammed the turret backward, the gun bouncing once before settling. The test officer, eyes wide, simply said, "That'll do." Not everyone was convinced. Within the British War Office, there were sceptics who feared that modifying the Sherman would compromise its reliability. American liaison officers in London were openly critical. Captain Charles Leach, U.S. Ordnance Representative, wrote in January 1944, "The British adaptation of our M4 tank appears excessive in recoil stress and unproven in field service. Suggest priority remain with M10 self-propelled mounts." But British armoured commanders like Brigadier Nigel Wigram pushed back. In a now famous exchange, Wigram retorted, "You may call it excessive. My men call it survival." There were political tensions beneath the technical debate. The Americans were preparing to field their own 76mm armed Shermans, but delays in production meant most of the tanks heading to Normandy would still carry the older 75mm guns. The British, anticipating a clash with German armour on the continent, couldn't wait. By February 1944, field workshops across southern England had begun converting Shermans into 17-pounder variants. The process took about 3,000 man-hours per tank. Buick engine parts met British ordnance steel in the most unlikely of marriages. They called it the Sherman Firefly, a name chosen almost by accident, borrowed from an officer who remarked that the muzzle flash lights up the night like a firefly. On paper, the Firefly was extraordinary. Its 17-pounder could penetrate a Panther's glacis plate at over 800 metres, something no Allied tank gun had managed before. In comparative tests at the Shoeburyness range, the weapon outperformed the American 76mm by nearly 40% in penetration. The British Armoured Fighting Vehicle, AFV Technical Report, March 1944, concluded, "The Sherman 17-pounder conversion possesses the only Allied gun capable of defeating Tiger and Panther armour at practical combat ranges. Its limitations are secondary to this fact. Still, for all its lethality, the Firefly was a compromise. The ammunition was unwieldy, 3 feet long and weighing nearly 20 pounds per round. Reloading in the confined turret was a struggle. The long barrel revealed its position the moment it fired. German gunners could trace the flash through the bocage. Crews learned to camouflage their Fireflies with deceptive paint. Some painted false muzzle brakes to resemble ordinary Shermans. Others disguised the gun barrel with whitewash or rags to break its outline. To enemy reconnaissance, a troop of 4 Shermans, 3 75mm models and 1 Firefly, looked uniform. In reality, one of them could kill a tiger. By late spring 1944, Fireflies began to appear in training grounds across southern England. In the 13th 18th Royal Hussars, Sergeant Ted Cooper remembered the first time he saw one. "We were lined up on Salisbury Plain, a sea of ordinary Shermans, and this one had a barrel that just kept going. We thought it was a joke at first, then they fired it. The shockwave knocked dust off the tank beside it. The round tore through a captured Panther target." Silence followed, then laughter, nervous but relieved. "We finally had something that could answer back," Cooper said. Firefly crews were hand-picked, men with steady nerves and good reflexes. Their training emphasized ambush tactics, hull-down positioning, and firing from shadowed cover. The doctrine shifted subtly. Fireflies were to hang back, using range to their advantage, while the standard Shermans drew attention. It was a dangerous ballet, but it gave Allied tankers something they hadn't felt in years: confidence. By May 1944, roughly 2,000 Fireflies had been converted, though not all were combat-ready. Priority shipments went to the British 7th Armoured Division, the 11th Armoured Division, and the Canadian 2nd Armoured Brigade. A memo from the 21st Army Group, dated 28 May 1944, outlined their intended role. Each troop of 4 tanks will include 1 Sherman 17-pounder variant. Employment to emphasize standoff engagements against enemy heavy armor. The Firefly was no longer an experiment. It was the secret spearhead of Allied armor for D-Day. As invasion orders circulated under utmost secrecy, Brighty watched his creation leave the workshops on flatbed trucks, bound for southern ports. He saluted each convoy as it passed. He knew what awaited them across the channel: hedgerows, ambushes, and the black silhouettes of tigers waiting in the mist. But he also knew this. For the first time since 1940, the British had a gun that could stare down a German tank and fire back without fear. In the coming weeks, on the fields of Normandy, the laughter of the panzers would fade. The Fireflies were coming, and they would burn bright enough to change the war. June 7th, 1944, the morning after D-Day. The beaches of Normandy still smoked, the tide littered with wrecked landing craft and burnt-out half-tracks. Inland, through the hedgerows and narrow lanes, the tank war that would define the campaign was about to begin. Major Bill Close of the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment climbed out of his Sherman, the damp smell of cordite and crushed grass heavy in the air. They had made it off Gold Beach with fewer losses than feared, but now the real fight loomed, pushing inland toward Bayeux and beyond, where German armour was massing. "This is where Jerry will come for us," Close told his gunner, "and he'll come hard." He was right. By midday, the first British and Canadian armoured units were fanning out through the bocage. A nightmare of narrow lanes, thick hedges, and fields barely wide enough for a tank to manoeuvre. Visibility was often less than 50 yards. Every corner could hide a panzer. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, commanded by the ruthless Kurt Panzer Meyer, was moving fast from Caen. Its Tiger I detachment, part of Schwer SS Panzer-Abteilung 101, was already in position near Villers-Bocage. In the distance, crews could hear the throaty growl of Maybach engines and the metallic clank of treads. The laughing panzers, those who had mocked Allied armour as matchboxes, were about to meet the Fireflies. At Le Mesnil-Patry, on June 8th, the Canadian Sherbrooke Fusiliers advanced cautiously across open fields. They had been told the area was lightly defended. Instead, they ran headlong into the Tigers of Michael Whitman's company. A shell screamed overhead, then another. The first Sherman exploded in a fireball, ammunition cooking off instantly. Within seconds, 3 more were burning. The Canadians returned fire, but their 75mm rounds glanced harmlessly off the Tiger's thick armour. Then one Firefly, Hobo, commanded by Lieutenant James Jim Radley, swung out from behind a hedgerow. Radley's gunner lined up on a Tiger cresting a rise, estimated the range at 800 yards, and fired. The 17-pounder's recoil slammed through the turret like a hammer blow. The AP round hit just below the Tiger's mantlet and punched through. Flames erupted from the German tank. Radley's crew cheered briefly before the next Tiger returned fire and obliterated Hobo with a single 88mm shot. It was the Fireflies' baptism by fire, brutal, costly, but undeniably effective. The battle reports that evening were grim but revealing. Of the 14 Shermans in Radley's squadron, 8 had been destroyed, but at least 2 Tigers lay burning. The Canadians learned quickly. To fight the Germans, they would have to think like hunters, not prey. Crews began developing improvised tactics: shoot and scoot. Fireflies would fire from cover, then immediately back into concealment before German gunners could return fire. Pairing. One Firefly operated with several standard Shermans. The others would act as decoys, drawing the enemy's attention while the Firefly struck from range. Hedge busting. Engineers cut firing gaps into hedgerows, allowing Fireflies to engage from unexpected angles. By June 10th, the doctrine was spreading across the 21st Army Group. Intelligence officers noted that German tankers were beginning to fear the long-barreled Shermans. Some reported being ordered to destroy any Sherman with an unusually long gun barrel before engaging others, an acknowledgement of the Firefly's new reputation. June 13th, 1944. The small town of Villers-Bocage would become one of the most infamous tank battles of the campaign. Whitman's Tiger 007 ambushed a column of the British 7th Armoured Division, destroying a dozen vehicles in minutes. It was a slaughter. But when the British regrouped later that day, the Fireflies of the 4th County of London Yeomanry went hunting. Sergeant Stan Lockwood's Firefly crept along a sunken lane overlooking the main road. Through his gun sight, Lockwood spotted a Tiger hull down near the village church. The rangefinder clicked. 900 yards. He whispered, "Up." His gunner adjusted. "On." "Fire." The 17-pounder roared. The round hit squarely through the Tiger's side plate, detonating its ammunition. The explosion sent the turret flying 10 feet into the air. Moments later, another Tiger attempted to flank the British position. Lockwood's Firefly fired again, this time from 700 yards. Another kill. By nightfall, 3 Tigers were out of action, 2 confirmed by Fireflies. It wasn't enough to turn the tide of the day, but it shattered the myth of German invincibility. In his post-action report, Lockwood wrote simply, "The Tiger is mortal. You just have to hit it first." For every success there were losses, many of them gruesome. Fireflies were prized targets for German gunners. Their long barrels made them easy to spot, and crews often referred to them grimly as the first to burn. Sergeant Ted Cooper of the 13th 18th Hussars recalled, "You knew the Firefly had to go first. You'd line up your sights, heart thumping, and pray the 17-pounder did its job before his 88 found you." To mitigate exposure, crews camouflaged barrels with rags and netting, painting white countershades to disguise the length. Some even attached fake muzzle brakes to mimic the stubby 75mm. The Germans quickly learned to look twice before assuming any Sherman was harmless. By late June, German tankers were reporting in intercepted radio traffic. "Beware the British Sherman with the long gun. It kills at 1,000 metres." As the Battle of Normandy dragged into July, more Fireflies arrived. Canadian, Polish and Free French units received them through British supply depots. The weapon became a symbol of Allied adaptation, the triumph of ingenuity over dogma. At Hill 112, southwest of Caen, British Fireflies faced the fearsome Panthers of the 9th SS Panzer Division. The battle raged for 2 days amid burning wheat fields. Lieutenant Pip Robbins' troop held a ridgeline, picking off Panthers as they crested the rise. His after-action report described one engagement: observed Panther at 1,200 yards, moving obliquely across front, fired 1 round APCBC, penetration achieved, tank disabled, second Panther withdrawn. It was methodical, deadly work. The Fireflies' superior range allowed them to turn the battlefield into a chessboard of ambush points. But the cost was high. Hill 112 changed hands multiple times, and by the end of the fight, nearly 70% of the British Shermans were destroyed or disabled. Yet the Fireflies had stopped the counterattack cold. By August, the Firefly had earned its place. It wasn't perfect. It was awkward, loud, and often a death trap if caught in the open. But it was the first Allied tank that gave crews a fighting chance. In a report from the 21st Army Group dated August 5, 1944, General Miles Dempsey wrote, "The introduction of the 17-pounder Sherman has fundamentally altered tank versus tank engagements. Our forces can now engage and defeat German heavy armour at parity of range." The Germans, for their part, could no longer rely on the terror of the Tiger. The laughing panzers of the spring were now cautious hunters, often forced to withdraw under accurate long-range fire. The battlefield dynamic was shifting, subtly but decisively. Allied tankers no longer fought from desperation, they fought with intent. By the end of the Normandy campaign, roughly 300 Fireflies had fought in combat. Their kill ratio against German heavy tanks was extraordinary, nearly 3-to-1 in some sectors. Yet every Firefly crew knew their advantage came with a price. The moment they fired, they became the enemy's primary target. Survival depended on nerves, camouflage, and the ability to vanish as quickly as they struck. As one trooper of the Sherbrooke Fusiliers put it in a post-war interview, "We used to joke that the Firefly was the best tank in the world for the first 30 seconds of a fight. Still, that was enough. Those 30 seconds changed the course of armoured warfare in Western Europe. The laughter of the panzers had fallen silent. The Fireflies, born of desperation, forged in improvisation, had proven that courage and ingenuity could burn brighter than steel." The summer of 1944 was one of smoke, mud, and the smell of cordite drifting across the hedgerows of Normandy. The campaign that began with beach assaults had become a grinding, claustrophobic slugfest in the green labyrinth of the French countryside. Tanks, designed for open manoeuvre, now fought blind, nose first, through sunken lanes where every hedge concealed an ambush. By mid-July, the Allied push toward Caen had stalled. German panzer divisions, particularly the 2nd and 12th SS, turned every field into a fortress. A single Tiger or Panther, hull down behind a hedgerow, could dominate an entire kilometre of approach. It was in this deadly environment that the Sherman Firefly earned its true reputation, not as a brute force weapon, but as a patient, calculating hunter. British armoured doctrine had never anticipated anything like the Bocage. In pre-war exercises on Salisbury Plain, tankers drilled on open fields, emphasizing speed and concentration of firepower. In Normandy, that theory crumbled. The hedgerows, haze, were centuries old, earthen embankments lined with roots and tangled brush. Many stood 5 or 6 feet high, impassable to vehicles without engineering assistance. Visibility was reduced to mere yards. Tank combat became a close-range duel of reflexes. Lieutenant John Gorman of the Irish Guards described it best in his 1946 debrief. "You didn't see the enemy until he was already aiming at you. The battle was decided by the man who fired first and hit. For the Firefly crews, that reality shaped everything. The 17-pounder was a sniper's weapon, devastating at range, but sluggish to aim in tight quarters. To survive, crews learned to turn hedgerows into their ally. They would cut firing holes at the base of embankments, allowing just the barrel to protrude. One shot, no more. Then reverse and relocate before German 75mm or 88mm guns zeroed in. This tactic, known as shoot and shift, became the Fireflies' trademark. The Germans, bewildered by the precision and fleeting nature of these attacks, nicknamed them Geisterkanonen, ghost guns. Nowhere did those tactics prove more critical than at Hill 112, southwest of Caen. It was a modest rise on a Normandy map, barely 100 metres above sea level, but whoever held it controlled the approaches to the city. From July 10th to the 23rd, the hill became a graveyard of tanks. The British 43rd, Wessex Division, and the 7th Armoured Division attacked from the west, while elements of the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions defended with Panthers and Tigers. The ground was churned to clay by artillery. Smoke hung in the air like a curtain. Captain Joe Ekins of the Northamptonshire Yeomanry, a quiet shoe factory worker before the war, was commanding the gun of his Firefly when he spotted 3 Panthers across a wheat field near Saint-Aignan-de-Cramenil. "We'd been told to hold fire until the right moment," he recalled decades later. "They didn't know we were there. They thought we were just another Sherman troop." Ekins's commander whispered, "Take the rear one first." He adjusted his sight, estimated the range at 800 yards, and fired. The AP round sliced through the first Panther's rear armour. Flames burst from its engine deck. The second Panther turned its turret, too late. Ekins fired again. Another hit. The third Panther attempted to reverse, a fatal mistake. Ekins' third shot struck the turret ring, killing the crew instantly. Within 12 seconds, 3 German heavy tanks were burning. One of them, according to post-war records, may have been commanded by the famed SS tank ace Michael Wittmann. That single engagement became legendary among Allied tankers. It proved that in the right hands, the Firefly could outthink and outshoot even the most feared tankers in Europe. Captured German officers, interrogated by the British Second Army's intelligence section in August 1944, spoke candidly of their changing perception. One report read, "We believed all Shermans were easy prey until the new type appeared. Its gun can pierce the Tiger at distances we cannot match. It is difficult to tell which Sherman carries it until it fires. Then one is dead." By then, the Wehrmacht had issued standing orders. If a Sherman with a long gun was spotted, it must be destroyed first. Panthers often ignored other targets entirely to focus on the Firefly. German propaganda had painted Allied tankers as amateurs relying on mass production. The Firefly challenged that myth. It wasn't just quantity now, it was ingenuity, adaptation, and precision. The Firefly's success came with brutal consequences for its crews. Its long gun made it instantly recognizable once it fired. And since it was based on the standard Sherman chassis, it retained the same thin armour, barely 2 inches on the front plate. A single 88mm hit meant instant destruction. The open stowage of ammunition turned many Shermans into crematoriums. Sergeant David Render of the Sherwood Rangers later described the feeling of being in a Firefly. "You knew that the moment you fired, you signed your death warrant. You had about 10 seconds to get out of sight, or you were finished." Crews often stripped the interior of anything flammable, throwing out spare gear to make room for more ammunition and fire extinguishers. Many carried small religious tokens or lucky charms on the dashboard. Still, morale was strangely high. Firefly crews considered themselves elite, part of an informal brotherhood of men trusted to wield the most powerful gun on the field. By mid-July, Operation Goodwood, the massive armoured assault to liberate Caen, brought nearly 700 British tanks into the open plains east of the city. It was one of the largest armoured engagements on the Western Front. The Fireflies, integrated into every squadron, were pivotal. As the armoured columns rolled forward, they engaged Panthers hidden in orchards and villages. Lieutenant Pip Robbins of the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry recorded a remarkable engagement in his combat diary. Observed enemy tank formation, 3 Panthers advancing across open ground. Opened fire at 1,200 yards, AP round penetrated first tank, second withdrew. Subsequent round destroyed command tank, remaining elements dispersed. The 17-pounder's flat trajectory and penetrating power gave the Allies parity, at last, against German heavy armour. For every Firefly lost, 2 or 3 panzers fell. By July 19th, Caen was liberated. The city was rubble, but the myth of German armour superiority was crumbling with it. The Firefly wasn't a miracle weapon. It was a stopgap, a Sherman modified under desperate circumstances to survive against the Tigers and Panthers of the Third Reich. But in Normandy it became the equaliser. After-action reports from the British 21st Army Group recorded an astonishing trend. In units equipped with Fireflies, tank losses were reduced by nearly a third during the final month of the Normandy campaign. Major General Percy Hobart summarised it best. It was not the strongest tank that prevailed, but the most adaptable. The Firefly was the mind's victory over brute force. August 1944. The dust-choked plains of Falaise. The German army, once a disciplined machine, was now a desperate procession of men and machines trapped in retreat. Allied air power pounded the roads, and the bocage that had once shielded the defenders now became a killing ground. Between the villages of Trône and Chambois, British and Canadian tank units formed the jaws of the closing pocket. In their vanguard rumbled the Fireflies, the giant killers of the 21st Army Group. The mood among German crews had changed. Gone was the arrogance of June. Now Tiger and Panther commanders crept forward with caution, scanning the hedgerows for that telltale long barrel, the one that spat death before a Tiger could even traverse its turret. Oberfeldwebel Karl Keller of the 2nd SS Panzer Division wrote in his diary on August 18th, "We used to joke about the Tommy tanks, said they were made of tin, but now they hunt us from the hedges. Their shells come from nowhere. The men call them ghost Shermans. The Canadians of the 4th Armoured Division advanced from the north, while the Polish 1st Armoured Division swung south. Between them, the remnants of the German 7th Army were funnelled into a shrinking corridor. In the early hours of August 19th, a troop of Fireflies from the Sherbrooke Fusiliers took position on a ridge overlooking a narrow country road. Below, in the mist, a column of retreating German armour moved, Panthers, Tigers, and half-tracks laden with infantry. Lieutenant Sidney Valpy Radley Walters, known to his men as Rad, was calm and deliberate. Through the sight of his Firefly, he watched the column edge forward, engines grumbling. "Hold," he whispered. "Wait for the lead Tiger." When it came into view, he fired. The 17-pounder roared, the shells streaking through fog and distance, striking the Tiger in the side. The explosion ripped through the fuel tank. Black smoke blossomed skyward. The convoy froze. In seconds, Radley Walters' troop fired again and again. 2 Panthers and another Tiger were left burning. The rest scattered into the woods, abandoning vehicles in panic. Post-action reports credited Radley Walters with up to a dozen kills that day, though he would later dismiss the number. "We weren't counting trophies," he said. "We were just trying to survive." Across the pocket, similar scenes unfolded. Fireflies lay in wait at crossroads and along hedgerows, ambushing fleeing German armour. For once, the Allies held the tactical upper hand. Canadian intelligence later summarised, "The Firefly's role in the encirclement was decisive. Its capacity for rapid, accurate, long-range fire denied the enemy the use of armour for counter-attack or withdrawal." Captured German officers admitted that the long-barrelled Shermans were now their most feared opponents. "You could tell when it was one of them," said a Panther commander of the 116th Panzer Division in post-war interrogation. You heard one shot, and then silence. The tank it hit would be gone. By August 22nd, the Falaise pocket was sealed. Thousands of German vehicles littered the countryside, many destroyed by air attack, but hundreds by tank fire. Allied armour rolled past burnt-out Panthers and Tigers still smoking in the sun. Sergeant Bill Cotton of the 13th 18th Royal Hussars described the sight. The Tigers were still smouldering, their barrels bent, tracks torn off. For years they'd been the nightmare. Now they looked mortal. The Firefly had done what few thought possible. It turned the tide in the armoured duel of Western Europe. When the campaign moved toward Belgium, the once ridiculed Sherman had earned a new respect. American tankers, initially sceptical of the British conversion, began requesting 17-pounder variants for their own formations. The Firefly's legacy was sealed not by its production numbers, fewer than 2,200 were built, but by its psychological impact. It shattered the myth of German invincibility. At war's end, in debriefings and conferences, even German officers admitted it. The tank they had mocked as a matchbox had become their executioner. In a captured Wehrmacht report filed on August 30th, 1944, one final line stands as epitaph. "The English Sherman with the long gun, it hunts like a wolf. One shot, one kill. We no longer laugh." In the hedgerows near Villers-Bocage, dawn light filtered through the smoke of burning fields. The British advance, spearheaded by the 7th Armoured Division, the famed Desert Rats, had driven into the Norman countryside with confidence. They believed they had broken through. Their Cromwells and Shermans, including several newly arrived Fireflies, rolled forward past the charred remains of German outposts. But inside a farmhouse turned strongpoint on the high ground outside town, Oberleutnant Michael Wittmann of the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion was already awake. His Tiger I, turret number 007, sat concealed behind a barn, its massive 88mm KWK 36 gun cleaned and loaded. To Wittmann and his men, the British tanks below were nothing but moving targets. The Tiger's armour, nearly invulnerable from the front, had shrugged off dozens of 75mm hits in Russia. "Shermans," Wittmann said with a thin smile. "Always the same." At 0900 hours, the Desert Rats entered Villers-Bocage. Their vanguard, Cromwells and half-tracks from the 4th County of London Yeomanry, moved unsuspectingly through the narrow streets. The ambush that followed became one of the most devastating single-handed actions of the war. Wittmann's Tiger roared to life, burst from cover, and fired point-blank into the column. Within minutes, 6 tanks and several carriers were ablaze. The shock was total. The 7th Armoured halted, disoriented, believing they faced an entire German company. In truth, it was one Tiger and a handful of Panzer Grenadiers exploiting the confusion. British radio chatter crackled with disbelief. "Tiger loose in the town! Tiger loose in the town!" For hours, chaos ruled Villers-Bocage. Cromwells tried to flank through side streets, but found themselves funneled into kill zones. Each 88mm shell punched through armour as though it were paper. Crews abandoned their tanks under fire, running for basements or hedgerows. Yet amid the devastation, one tank stood its ground. A Sherman Firefly commanded by Sergeant Joe Ekins of the Northamptonshire Yeomanry. Ekins had trained on the Firefly for months, but never fired it in anger. His gunner, Corporal Gordon, spotted Wittmann's Tiger emerging from the smoke to reposition. "Target, Tiger, bearing left, range, 800. Gordon adjusted the sight and squeezed the trigger. The 17-pounder barked, recoiling violently. A flash of flame erupted on the Tiger's right side, where the armour was thinnest. Wittmann's crew tried to turn, but before the turret could traverse, a second round struck the hull, then a third. The Tiger stopped. Smoke poured from the hatches. Wittmann was dead. The duel lasted less than 3 minutes, yet its psychological impact was immense. The British had proven that even the feared Tiger could be destroyed, not by luck, but by design. In the days that followed, British intelligence officers examined the battlefield. The Tiger's hull was twisted open by the Fireflies' APDS rounds. Major John Shearer of the 21st Army Group Technical Branch recorded in his report, "The engagement at Villers-Bocage confirms the Fireflies' effectiveness against heavy armour. Range, penetration and velocity all surpass prior British tank guns. Crews report increased confidence." In London, Churchill received word of the event with satisfaction. "Tell them," he said, "the matchbox now strikes back." But on the German side, the news was sobering. The loss of Wittmann, a national hero, was more than a tactical blow. It marked a psychological turning point. No longer could German armour commanders assume invincibility. Allied guns had caught up. At the same time, the Allied advance still struggled through the Bocage. For every destroyed Tiger, dozens of Shermans were lost. Yet the tide was shifting in doctrine as much as in firepower. Instead of meeting Tigers head-on, Allied commanders began coordinating combined arms tactics, artillery, infantry and air support, working in concert to isolate and overwhelm German armour. A German panzer grenadier later wrote in his diary, captured by US troops, "The Shermans come like ghosts through the smoke. Always another one, always moving. Our Tigers burn, and still they come." By late July, the once proud Panzer Lehr Division had been reduced to a shadow of its former strength. Allied Fireflies were being distributed to nearly every armoured regiment, each one marked with a distinctive long barrel that German crews quickly learned to fear. The laughter that had echoed through the panzer ranks in early June was gone. In its place came grim respect and growing desperation. The battlefield had changed, so had the hunters, and in the fields of Normandy, beneath the drifting smoke and shattered hedgerows, the legend of the Firefly was just beginning to burn. By late July 1944, the Allies had learned to fight the Tiger on their own terms. Gone were the days of frontal assaults and blind courage. Instead, the British and Canadian tankers of the 21st Army Group began to perfect ambush warfare, patient, methodical, and deadly. In the Bocage country south of Caen, the Sherman Firefly had become the spearhead of this new doctrine. Its long 17-pounder gun gave it range and penetration unmatched by any Allied tank gun in the European theatre. But it also made the Firefly a target. German spotters could identify it instantly by its elongated barrel, and orders from Panzer headquarters were explicit. Destroy the long-barreled Shermans first. The British responded with ingenuity. Crews painted false muzzle brakes or camouflaged their barrels with foliage. Some shortened the paint near the tip to make the gun appear smaller at distance. In the hedgerows, deception could mean survival. Captain Douglas Kay of the 13th 18th Royal Hussars recalled in his after-action report, "We always put the Firefly second or third in column, never in front. The enemy would go for it first. But once our lead tanks drew fire, the Firefly spoke. When it did, the battlefield changed in seconds. In one engagement outside Saint-Germain-la-Blanche-Herbe, Kay's troop encountered 2 Tigers dug in on a ridge. His Cromwells and standard Shermans fired to suppress, rounds bouncing off the thick armour. The Firefly, positioned in concealment 800 yards away, fired just twice. Both shots hit. Both Tigers burned within minutes. Word spread quickly among British units. Firefly crews began marking their kills with discreet white rings on the gun barrel, a quiet badge of pride. Infantrymen cheered when they saw one roll up behind them, knowing that even the dreaded Tigers could fall. German commanders, once so confident, began reporting alarming losses. Panzer Lehr Division recorded the destruction of 8 heavy tanks by unknown Allied guns of exceptional power. The myth of invulnerability was gone, and yet the Firefly was never a perfect weapon. Its cramped interior, heavy recoil and limited ammunition made it difficult to fight continuously. But the crews didn't care. They called it the Equalizer. By August, as Operation Totalize and later Tractable drove toward Falaise, Fireflies were everywhere, tucked behind barns, lying in wait in orchards, covering crossroads. The once laughed-at Shermans had evolved into predators. A Canadian officer wrote after Falaise, "For the first time, we saw fear in the eyes of German tank crews. When our Fireflies fired, they did not stay to duel, they ran. The tables had turned. The same German panzer men who once mocked the Sherman as a matchbox now whispered another name with dread through the hedgerows. Feuerfliege, the Firefly, the tank that hunted tigers." August 1944. The German 7th Army was collapsing in the Falaise pocket, its armour choked in narrow roads littered with burning wrecks. Among the wreckage were Tigers and Panthers, once the terror of Europe, now silent carcasses beside smouldering Shermans and Cromwells. The Fireflies had done their work. For months the Germans had been the hunters. They fought from ambush, dictating range and engagement. But Normandy reversed that dynamic. The Allied air forces ruled the skies, and on the ground the Firefly made the battlefield unpredictable for the Panzerwaffe. Where once a Tiger could command an entire field, now it had to fear unseen enemies firing from beyond a kilometre away. A captured German lieutenant from Panzer Lehr Division, interrogated on August 23, 1944, described the shift. "We were trained to crush Shermans from the front. That was doctrine, but now their long guns could reach us first. They stayed hidden until we fired. Then came one shot, clean, precise, and the Tiger was finished." British and Canadian reports confirmed this. Firefly gunners routinely opened fire at 1,000 to 1,200 yards, well before German crews expected danger. The effect was psychological as much as tactical. German morale, already frayed by fuel shortages and air attacks, wavered further each time a Tiger brewed up from an invisible strike. Major George Withers of the 2nd Northamptonshire Yeomanry described a textbook engagement. "We spotted a Tiger hull down on a ridgeline. He hadn't seen us. Our Firefly lined up, fired once, and the round penetrated the mantlet. The Tiger burned instantly. For the rest of the battle, no German tank dared crest that hill again. It was this transformation, from hunted to hunter, that defined the Firefly's legacy. British design philosophy had always favoured mobility and numbers, not brute strength. The 17-pounder turned that philosophy on its head. Suddenly, Allied armour could kill at parity or better. The Tiger's advantage in fear was gone. Yet victory came with cost. Firefly crews often faced counterfire they couldn't survive. Its thin side armour and open fighting compartment offered little protection from high-velocity shells. In many after-action reports, the victor's note was followed by casualty tallies, gunners wounded, loaders killed by spalling or shrapnel. Still, they pressed on. By the time the Allies reached the Seine, Fireflies had accounted for more than 300 confirmed tank kills in Normandy alone, a remarkable record for a machine that represented barely 1 in 6 Shermans on the field. In the ruins of France, Allied commanders began to understand the full meaning of what they'd achieved. The Firefly wasn't just a weapon, it was proof that adaptation and willpower could overcome even the most imposing enemy technology. In a post-war interview, Heinz Guderian, the father of Germany's armoured doctrine, admitted as much. "The Allies learned faster than we expected. Their tanks may have been inferior in armour, but not in courage, and no longer in firepower." By autumn, the laughter that had echoed through German tank parks in June 1944 was gone. In its place was silence, the stunned realization that the so-called inferior Sherman had evolved into a predator. In the firelit fields of Normandy, amid the burned-out hulks of Tigers and Panthers, one truth had become clear. Speed, numbers, and courage had triumphed over pride, and the Firefly's sting still glowed long after the smoke cleared. September 1944. The war in France had turned. German armour, once the embodiment of unstoppable might, was shattered and retreating toward the Siegfried Line. Roads clogged with wrecked panzers, Tigers, Panthers, Panzer-Fours, lay testament to a new kind of warfare the Germans had never truly understood. One built not on the myth of invincibility, but on adaptability, coordination, and overwhelming persistence. For the men who had once laughed at the matchbox Shermans, the battlefield had become a graveyard of assumptions. In the hedgerows of Normandy and the open fields beyond Falaise, they had learned a bitter truth. The Firefly had erased their sense of superiority. The transformation had begun long before Normandy. In 1943, while the Wehrmacht pushed the Red Army at Kursk and Italy braced for invasion, British ordnance engineers at the Royal Armament Research and Development Establishment in Fort Halstead were already experimenting with something radical, mounting the 17-pounder anti-tank gun into a Sherman hull. The challenge was immense. The gun's length, recoil, and breech made it too large for the turret. The radio had to be relocated to an armoured box welded to the rear of the turret. Ammunition was stored vertically along the sides, and the loader worked in cramped, dangerous conditions. Yet, by the time the 21st Army Group assembled for Operation Overlord, 342 Fireflies were ready for combat. Lieutenant Colonel George Pip Roberts of the 11th Armoured Division recalled the reaction. When we saw what it could do on the ranges, we knew this was the tank that could finally go toe-to-toe with a Tiger. It wasn't perfect, but it could kill what nothing else could. The Germans, however, had no idea it existed. Their intelligence assessments, drawn from captured Shermans in North Africa and Italy, described Allied armour as weakly armed and soft-skinned. Their own tank designs grew ever heavier and more complex. By 1944, a Tiger Y weighed nearly 60 tons and carried an 88mm KWK-36 gun capable of piercing 100mm of armour at 2 kilometres. The Panther, faster and more mobile, was equally lethal. German doctrine, Feuerüberlegenheit, or fire superiority, revolved around long-range duels and defensive ambushes. They believed the Allies, with their inferior 75mm guns, could not challenge them frontally. They were wrong. On June 12, 1944, a Firefly from the 13th 18th Royal Hussars destroyed the first Panther in Normandy with a single 17-pounder shot at over 1,000 yards. Days later, near Villers-Bocage, British crews used Fireflies to counter the ambushes of Michael Whitman's Tiger Battalion, the same unit that had decimated a column of Cromwell's only hours earlier. In the chaos of those early days, word spread among German tankers. The English have a long-gunned Sherman. It kills Tigers. By July, that rumour had become fear. The distinctive long barrel of the Firefly was instantly recognisable, and German tankers were ordered to prioritise it in every engagement. Some Allied crews painted disruptive camouflage patterns or false barrel tips to disguise their Fireflies among the standard Shermans. But the damage to German confidence was done. A report from Panzer Regiment 1, dated July 27, 1944, captured after the war, reads, "We are encountering a new Sherman variant with a long gun of high velocity. Penetrations through frontal armour at distances exceeding 1 kilometre. Crews report feeling helpless if caught in open terrain. For the Allied tankers, the Firefly was both a blessing and a burden. Its immense power came at a cost: recoil concussion, deafening blast, and the constant threat of detonation from a single hit. The open-topped design and thin armour meant that a well-placed 75mm or 88mm could still destroy it instantly. Sergeant Gordon MacLeod of the Canadian Sherbrooke Fusiliers recalled in his memoir, "Every time we fired, the gun blast sucked the air out of the turret. You didn't hear the hit, you felt it. but when you saw a Tiger go up, you forgot the fear. By August, the Firefly had become the decisive instrument of the British and Canadian armoured push across northern France. In the Falaise pocket alone, Fireflies accounted for more than 150 confirmed tank kills, according to 21st Army Group operational records. Even American crews took notice. Though the US Army had rejected the 17-pounder for production, preferring the 76mm gun on the M4A1, US commanders in the European theatre increasingly requested British Firefly support in mixed units. Major General John S. Wood of the US 4th Armoured Division wrote to SHAEF headquarters in late August. The British Sherman, 17-pounder, is a most effective tank destroyer. We should consider incorporating them where possible. The men trust it. By autumn, as the Allies pushed toward the Siegfried Line, the myth of German invincibility was gone. In its place stood a new reality, a balanced battlefield where the outcome depended not on raw steel but on strategy, logistics, and sheer persistence. German production was collapsing. Fewer than 70 operational Tigers remained on the Western Front by September 1944. Fuel was so scarce that entire divisions were forced to abandon vehicles intact. Meanwhile, the Allies rolled forward with thousands of Shermans, roughly 2,000 in France alone, and a growing number of Fireflies. A German staff report, intercepted by Ultra and dated September 5, 1944, summarized the shift. Enemy armour no longer avoids combat. Their long-gunned Shermans are lethal. Our Tigers cannot manoeuvre freely due to air threat and lack of fuel. Our superiority is lost. Even among the Luftwaffe, the change was evident. Pilots reported seeing more Allied tanks advancing in close coordination with fighter bombers, a system the Germans could no longer counter. In the post-war years, the legend of the Firefly grew, but those who had fought in it remembered a simpler truth. It was not the most heavily armoured or comfortable machine, nor was it as revered as the Tiger. It was, however, the right tank at the right time, a weapon born of necessity and ingenuity. At the 1962 British Armoured Corps Veterans Symposium, former Firefly gunner Jack Harper summarised it best. They laughed at us once, called us amateurs with tin cans. But in Normandy we proved that courage and brains could beat brute strength. The Firefly was our answer to their arrogance. The laughter of the laughing panzers had faded into the smoke of their own burning machines. When historians look back on Normandy, they often measure the campaign in miles gained, towns liberated, or tanks destroyed. But for those who lived it, it was something more intimate, a duel of belief systems. The Germans believed in the supremacy of armour. The Allies believed in the power of adaptability. In the end, it was adaptability that survived. And as the last Fireflies rumbled eastward through the shattered villages of France, their crews knew they carried not just a weapon, but a message, that even the mightiest enemy could be outthought, outbuilt, and outlasted. The Tiger had roared, the Firefly had answered, and Europe would never be the same again.